Okay, welcome to The Moral World, Chapter 1, Part 1. In this section, we're trying to demonstrate that morality is part of the material world only. Even though people have, through the ages, attempted to equate religion and morality together, I want to demonstrate that that is not the case, that in fact religion, or more precisely faith, actually transcends beyond morality, because morality is part of the material world. It's part of the physical realm of interrelationships of one individual to another. So in Part 1 here, I'm dealing with a Western story, and in Part 2, we'll look at an Eastern tradition to show that this is, in fact, worldwide. The story from the Western tradition is the Akedah from Genesis 22. And it begins in the city of Ur, the ancient city of Ur. And you can see here is an image of the great ziggurat at Ur that archaeologists have uncovered recently. Well, the city of Ur, like most places of the ancient world, was a pagan culture. There were a lot of different gods and goddesses, and people would build statues, create statues that people could put in their homes. And this would bring prosperity to them, or it would help them bring children into this world. Or maybe they'd put it in their places of business for prosperity, or in their gardens to make the crops grow. Well, one of these idol makers was an individual called Terah. And Terah is the father of Abram. Now, when Abram was 14 years old, his father left him alone in the idol shop while he went away on business. And when he returned after a few days, he found that every idol in that shop had been smashed and destroyed, all with the exception of the one largest one. And he became very angry because, after all, a lot of work had gone into making those. This is where his money and his profitability comes from, his family's well-being. And so he demanded to know what happened here. And Abram responded, well, the one largest deity became angry and destroyed all of the others. Well, Terah didn't buy that for a minute. He knew that either Abram had destroyed them or he'd allowed someone else to do it. He never once entertained the idea that it was the largest god destroying the smaller ones. And that proves the point that Abram wanted to make. His father doesn't believe in what he's peddling. He doesn't believe in the great gods and goddesses of this pagan world. They have no power. If he really did, then obviously he would have embraced this idea. He would have said, yes, I see that the great God has become angry and has destroyed them. But he never thinks about that. And so Terah is going to learn the power of Abram's belief in his ability to express himself. As Abram grows, he will form a covenant with this new God, what becomes known as the God of the Hebrew people or the Jewish people. And he will, of course, become married to Sarai. When Abram takes the covenant, he is given the name of Abraham, father of many, or father of the multitude, and Sarai takes the name of Sarah, or Sarah. God promises to them that a child will be born to them, and that this child will go on to do great and wonderful things. He will become the founder of a great nation. But yet they wait and wait and wait and wait, and still no child comes. So Sarah begins to think that maybe this has something to do with her. And so she allows her husband to lay with her handmaiden, Hagar. And sure enough, they produce a child called Ishmael. Well, Ishmael is going to be loved by Abraham and doted upon by Abraham. He is that great child, that great beloved one. But because of his love of Ishmael, he also begins paying a lot of attention to Hagar. And Sarah doesn't like that. So she sort of starts thinking, what can be done? Well, at this point, nothing can be done, because She is the mother of Abraham's child. But then we're told miracle upon miracles when Abraham is 99 years old and Sarah is 90. A child is born to them, and that child is called Isaac. Now she sees her opportunity. Isaac is the great child. He's the one that God promised. And she demands that Hagar and Ishmael be cast out into the wilderness, where they have their own near-death experience. And that plays very prominently within the Islamic tradition, because Ishmael is the lineage that leads to Muhammad, that leads to the founding of Islam, whereas Isaac is the lineage that leads to Judaism and Christianity. So we can see that here Abraham is the father of all three Western faiths. Well, Isaac grows up in his father's care, and again, he dotes upon Isaac. He loves Isaac. Here is the child that has been promised to him. But then one day God comes to him and says, take this child and hand him back. Give him back to us. Take him to the mountaintop and offer him for sacrifice. Now this is, a tremendous thing that is being asked of Abraham. And he has to make a choice. He has to make a decision. Does he obey or does he not? But he decides he's going to take Isaac to the mountaintop. And so he sets off with Isaac and Eliezer, and they head off for the mountaintop. Isaac and Abraham make the final journey to the top. Isaac is laid out on the altar, and Abraham is ready to slaughter Isaac because God has commanded it. An angel intervenes and says, you can't do this. I know that your faith is true. I know that you have faith, you have belief, and that you will do what God has told you to do no matter what it is. Well, that's fine, and we know how the story ends. But at the same time, we're left with this image of a father who is willing to take his son to this mountaintop and kill him because a voice in his head has told him to. So this story has very powerful impact, and a lot of people don't really think about the implications of that. And they start to say, well, as in the sense of divine command, God has said, do this, therefore it must be right. It is the morally correct course of action. But of course, what Abraham is doing here could not be imagined as morally right. We could never understand it as the proper course of action. And in fact, the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard is going to spend a lot of time on this issue in a work called Fear and Trembling. And in that work, he envisions the fact that Abraham is an individual who has to make choices, who has to make decisions within his life, just like we all do. And as individuals, we are put in a unique situation, and we are the only ones who can make those choices. We see how the story works out within the Bible, but Kierkegaard shows several other possibilities as to how Abraham might have handled the situation. But we have to work with what we're given. And in that story, we see the sacrifice taking place. Well, Kierkegaard wants to draw an analogy to the story of the Akedah here with that of the story of Agamemnon from the ancient Greek traditions. In the ancient Greek view, Agamemnon was a great warrior, and he had in some way offended or harmed the gods, and so he ends up being placed on this island. In the meanwhile, his whole kingdom is under threat. And the only way that the gods will allow him to leave that island and to go back and rescue his kingdom is if he's willing to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. And so Agamemnon, like Abraham, was put in a terrible situation of destroying their child. But, as Kierkegaard points out, in the case of Agamemnon, we can understand his action. Whether we agree with it or not is not the relevant point here. The fact is that we can understand why it's being done, because it's being done within the context of an ordinary moral sphere. Agamemnon is making what we would call a utilitarian decision. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And so he can say, I am sacrificing my daughter because by doing so I will be able to save thousands upon thousands of people. We know that we can understand that choice that's being made. There's a rationale behind it. There's a logic behind it. But in the story of Abraham, there is no logic behind it. There is nothing we can point to and say, see, I am sacrificing Isaac for the greater good of mankind. I'm sacrificing Isaac for this reason or for that reason. All I can do is see this madman on a mountaintop who is going to kill his child because a voice in his head has told him to do so. If anyone were to try that today, we would want that person to be locked up. We'd want that person to be under psychiatric care, hearing voices. But yet, Abraham is not like that. In the story of Abraham, we have an individual who is operating not from an ethical sphere, but who has transcended beyond it. He is doing what God has commanded him to do. But the only person who knows that God has commanded this is Abraham. He's the one who's heard the voice. He's the one who has to put that absolute faith or trust or belief in this higher power and do the thing that is asked for him. And that's the only thing that he can do, nothing more. So his decision transcends beyond morality. It is not a moral choice. It is a choice of faith. What is faith? Well, Kierkegaard makes the statement that faith is an objective uncertainty held fast through appropriation with the most passionate inwardness. In other words, it doesn't matter what anybody else sees, you embrace it, you accept it, you believe it. And that's what Kierkegaard claims, and that's what Abraham does in this story. But he's acting out of faith in God, and of course we're told that everything works out all right because of that. But it's not something that can be understood from a moral sphere.